Welcome, everyone, to your favorite channel, AI Horror Stories. Today, we're bringing you 3 chilling tales that will haunt your nights. 1. Me Tai Do Tai Walker. Can a dog's loyalty answer even a terrifying shadow? A boy takes a bet, but little does he know his bravery will lead him to a horrifying secret. A haunting voice at midnight, a dog's mysterious reply, and then a bloody head falls down the chimney. Will the boy survive until morning? 2. The Dare. Can a simple dare lead you to death's door? A girl dares to enter a graveyard, but she doesn't know that a small mistake will cost her her life. Can superstitions be true? Will the graveyard witch drag her down? 3. The Dead Hand. Can the secrets hidden in a bog drive you to madness? A brave boy challenges the mystery of the bog, but he doesn't know a severed hand awaits him. Will he survive the night? Stay tuned until the end of these stories, because each one holds a secret that will leave you pondering. Let's begin. 1. Me Tai Do Tai Walker. There was a small village in the middle of a dark forest. In the village, there was a haunted house that everyone was terrified to enter. Nobody would dare to stay there overnight. Legend had it that, every night at midnight, a bloody severed head fell down the chimney. One day, a rich man was passing through the village. After hearing about the haunted house, he offered $1,000 to whoever was brave enough to spend an entire night inside. None of the villagers would take him up on his bet until a young boy stepped forward and raised his hand. The boy announced that he would spend the night in the haunted house as long as he could bring his dog with him. The man agreed, and it was settled. The next evening, the boy set off for the haunted house with his trusty dog following close behind. As he entered the dreary abode, he whistled a happy tune to calm his nerves. After doing a little exploring, he decided to make himself comfortable in the living room. He started a fire in the fireplace, then lay down on the couch with his dog and waited for morning to arrive. For a while, nothing happened. Then, a little after midnight, he thought he heard a strange noise over the cracking of the fire and the creaking of the house. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere out in the woods. Someone or something was singing a haunting tunes. Me Tai Do Tai Walker, sang the eerie voice. The boy stared out the window and his hair stood on end. Maybe it's just somebody taking a shortcut through the woods, he told himself. Then, his dog suddenly perked up and sang, Lynchy Kinchy Kali Mali Dingo Dingo. The boy could hardly believe his ears. His dog had never uttered a word before. Now it was answering the haunting voice in the woods. He pinched himself to make sure he wasn't dreaming. A few minutes later, the boy heard the voice singing again. Only this time it was closer and louder. Me Tai Do Tai Walker, mysterious voice, sang the dog answered again. Lynchy Kinchy Kali Mali Dingo Dingo. This really had the boy scared. He was afraid that whoever was lurking in the woods would hear the dog singing and come to get them. A few minutes later, the boy heard the voice singing again. Now it was in the backyard. Me Tai Do Tai Walker, it cried. The dog sang back louder. Elwinty Kinchi, Kali Mali, Dingo Dingo. A few inutes later, the boy heard the voice singing again. Now it was coming down the chimney. Me Tai Do Tai Walker, it yelled. Again, the dog sang back. Elwinty Kinchi, Kali Mali, Dingo Dingo. Suddenly, a bloody severed head fell down the chimney. It missed the fire and landed right in front of the dog. The dog took one look at it and fell over dead from fright. Then the head turned and stared at the boy. It slowly opened its mouth and screamed. The next morning, the rich man went to check on the boy. He found him lying on the floor of the haunted house. His hair had turned white and he couldn't stop screaming. 2. The Dare. One night, in a small American town, a young girl threw a party and invited all her friends from school. There was a large group of boys and girls, and as the night went on, they began telling scary stories. One boy said he had heard an urban legend about an old graveyard that was located near the girl's house. According to the story, an old woman had been buried in the middle of the cemetery, and there were rumors that she was a witch. They said that if someone stood on her grave at midnight, she would grab them and drag them down to hell. I would never go near that graveyard after dark, another boy said. "You're all a bunch of morons," laughed the girl who owned the house. "It's just a silly superstition. I can't believe you'd take it seriously." The boy who had told the story turned to her and sneered, "It's all very well to be brave when you're safe and warm in your own home. I think you'd have a different attitude if you actually went to that graveyard." "It wouldn't make a difference," replied the girl haughtily. "Okay, then prove it," said the boy. "We'll all go down to the cemetery and wait outside while you go in and stand on the old witch's grave." "A grave doesn't scare me," said the girl. "I'll do it right now." "You'll have to prove you really did it," said the boy. "Otherwise you might chicken out." He took a knife from the kitchen drawer and handed it to her. "Stick this knife in the grave," he said. "Then we'll know you were there for sure." The group of kids set out for the graveyard, and when they reached the old iron gates, they gathered in a circle. All of them stared at the girl. She tried to pretend she wasn't scared, and she hoped they didn't see her shivering in fear. With the knife clutched tightly in her hand, the girl walked through the old iron gateway and made her way through the darkened graveyard. In the moonlight, the tombstones and the trees cast strange and unnerving shadows. Eventually, she came to the old woman's grave. "There is nothing to be scared of," the girl told herself. "It's just a stupid story." Crouching in front of the headstone, she whispered, "I'm not afraid of you." Then she raised the knife above her head and thrust it into the earth. "Take that, you old witch," she chuckled. The girl was about to turn and leave when she felt something holding her back. She couldn't move. Something was tugging on the hem of her dress and dragging her down. She was filled with terror and flew into a panic. "Help!" she cried. "She's got me! She's got me!" When she didn't come back, her friends began to get worried. After a while, they cautiously entered the graveyard to look for her. They found her sprawled across the old woman's grave. She was dead, and her face was frozen in a silent scream. Without realizing it, she had plunged the knife through her skirt and had pinned it to the ground. That was what had been holding her. The poor girl had been so terrified that her heart gave in and she died of fright. 3. The Dead Hand. There was a small village in Ireland that lay on the edge of a large bog. The marshy land stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with small, bushy weeds and the skeletons of tall, ragged trees with branches that reached out like long, twisted arms. The soggy ground could be dangerous because it was riddled with many deep bog holes that were filled with black, murky water. The bog holes were often hidden behind clumps of foliage, and it was important to watch your step. If a man accidentally fell down a bog hole, he would never come up again. It was a fearsome place, if all the tales told about it are true. It was before my time, but I have heard many a strange story about the bog, and it would make your skin creep just to listen to them. Every day, the men in the village went out onto the bog and toiled for hours, cutting the turf. They loaded it up into wheelbarrows and hauled it home to dry it in the sun. They used the turf for fuel, burning it in the fireplace to heat their homes. They were also able to sell it to make money. But after the sun had set, nobody would dare venture out in the darkness onto that desolate bog. In the moonlight, the wind would whistle through the dead branches of the twisted trees. Those who lived nearby would often glimpse strange shapes creeping across the deserted stretch of swamp. There were rumors throughout the village that strange creatures emerged from the bog holes at night. People were so afraid that they refused to leave their homes after dark. There was only one person in the village who did not believe in these creatures, a tall young man by the name of Tom McManus. Everybody knew him as Long Tom. On his way home from work, as the light began to fade, he'd often whisper to his friends, "There's one!" And they would jump and run, and Tom would laugh and laugh. Finally, some of his friends turned on him. "If you know so much," they said, "why don't you go out onto the bog some night and see what happens to you?" "I'll do it," said Long Tom. "Sure. Don't I work out there every day? Not once have I ever seen anything to frighten me. Why would it be different at night? Tomorrow night, I'll take my lantern and walk out to the hanging willow tree in the middle of the bog. If I get scared and run, I'll never make fun of you again." The next night, the men went to Long Tom McManus's house to see him on his way. It was the blackest of nights, and thick clouds obscured the moon, blocking out the light. When they arrived, Tom's mother was pleading with him not to go. "I'll be all right," he said. "There's nothing to be afraid of. Don't be foolish like the rest." He took his lantern and, singing to himself, headed down the path that led to the bog. Some of the young men wondered if Tom wasn't right. Maybe they were afraid of things that did not exist. A few decided to follow him and see for themselves, but they stayed far behind in case he ran into trouble. They were sure they saw dark shapes moving about. But Tom's lantern kept bobbing up and down, and Tom's voice kept floating back to them, and nothing happened. Finally, they caught sight of the willow tree. There was Tom standing in a circle of light, looking this way and that, whistling a happy tune. All of a sudden, the wind blew out his lantern, and Tom suddenly stopped whistling. The men stood silent and still in the blackness, straining their eyes to see and waiting for something awful to happen. When the clouds shifted and the moon peeked out again, they caught a glimpse of Long Tom. His back was up against the willow tree and his arms were out in front of him, as if he was fighting something off. It seemed like the very darkness was alive with slimy, creeping things. Strange shapes were swirling about him. They could hear loud wails and awful moaning sounds. Then, the clouds covered the moon again, and once more it was as black as pitch. By now, the men were on their knees, praying for dear life and calling upon the Virgin Mary and all the saints to protect them. When the moon came out again, Tom's face was as pale as death. He was desperately hanging onto the willow tree with one arm. His other arm was stretched out in front of him and something was pulling on it. It looked like a disembodied hand, with rotting flesh dropping off the moldy bones, and it had a tight grasp on poor Tom's arm. Stronger and stronger it pulled, until at last, Tom lost his grip on the tree and was dragged off into the night, shrieking like a soul in hell. That's what the men said they witnessed before Tom was swallowed up by the darkness. When the clouds blotted out the moon once more, the men turned and ran through the blackness toward the village. Again and again they lost the path and fell into the muck, struggling to avoid the deadly bog holes. In the end, they crawled back on their hands and knees. But Tom McManus was not with them. In the morning, the people searched everywhere for Tom. Finally, they gave him up for lost.